Today, Bitcoin rises back to the $97,000 level. Blockchain firms ask Congress to roll back IRS rules focused on DeFi brokers. And Matt Hougan of Bitwise discusses the firm's adoption of crypto ETFs on Wall Street and the firm's XRP spot ETF filing. Bitcoin rose back above the $97,000 level. Ether hovered at $27.13, while XRP rose around 1.9%. Okay, let's talk about the top stories. A group of nearly 80 blockchain firms sent a letter to leaders in Congress urging them to roll back an IRS rule targeting DeFi platforms. The Blockchain Association penned a letter to Majority Leader John Thune and Minority Leader Chuck Schumer in the Senate, and Speaker Mike Johnson and Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries in the House. Now, the letter urges Congress to repeal new regulations put in place by the IRS at the end of 2024, which created reporting requirements for front-end service providers of digital asset transactions, or DeFi brokers. Now, those brokers would be required to generate 1099 tax forms for customers buying and selling on their platforms. The Blockchain Association argues those new reporting requirements represent regulatory overreach that fundamentally misunderstands the technology that it attempts to regulate. Next, CNBC International caught up with Crypto.com's president and COO, Eric Anziani, as CoinDesk's consensus event takes place in Hong Kong. The region has been seen as a crypto hub for some time, but Anziani also has his eyes on the US, which he says is playing catch-up.
There's a wave of optimism coming out of the US. We are expecting to have better clarity in terms of the rule, whether for trading, for stable coins, and there are a lot of discussion, and we're actively participating into those. I think the US new administration really wants the US to become that capital and regain leadership for digital assets. So we're keen to participate in this, what we call the new golden age of crypto in the US.
Last, Argentina's President Javier Milei is set to meet with US officials amid a scandal involving promotion of a cryptocurrency. According to Barron's, Milei is set to meet with the IMF and Elon Musk today, along with a potential meetup with President Trump. He's also reportedly set to address the Conservative Political Action Conference, or CPAC, this weekend. Now, Milei is still facing uproar over his promotion of crypto token Libra in a now-deleted post on X. That cryptocurrency surged to $4.5 billion in market cap before crashing. All right, let's talk about crypto ETFs here in the US for our main story. I spoke with Matt Hougan, CIO of Bitwise, for his take on the rate of adoption for crypto exchange-traded funds. Plus, as the SEC reviews the firm's filing to launch a spot XRP ETF, he discusses what demand for an XRP fund might look like. So Matt, we just got the latest quarterly read on which institutional investors bought into the new spot crypto ETFs in Q4. At a high level, which hedge funds and firms were buying in and who was cashing out?
Yeah, I think the biggest story was a lot of institutions bought in. One question we had was whether the change in administration, the November elections, would make it easier for institutions to move into the crypto space. And the 13F filing said that dramatically, right? The share of Bitcoin ETF AUM captured by those filings, so the share of institutional investment in the Bitcoin ETFs, went from about 17 to 28%, a huge uptick. And I think that's going higher. What we're seeing from types of firms saw continued significant adoption from hedge funds. Most of the world's largest hedge funds are now significant holders of hundreds of millions or billions of dollars of Bitcoin ETFs. We saw continued adoption by endowments and pensions, state of Wisconsin dialing up their allocation. And of course, we saw a sovereign wealth fund from Abu Dhabi put nearly $500 million into Bitcoin ETFs. I would call it just an extraordinary quarter for Bitcoin ETFs in terms of marching down the pathway towards institutional adoption.
Now, this is the second quarter where we got to look at the popularity of the Bitcoin ETF versus Ether ETFs. And it does seem like the Ether fund started to pick up some momentum. Talk to me about what you saw in those filings.
That's exactly right. A lot of people wrote off the Ethereum ETFs when they first launched because they had a very slow launch. Crypto in general is maybe short-term bearish on Ethereum, but that's not what you see in the 13F filings. And it's not what you see in recent flows. Just like Bitcoin ETFs, the share of assets captured by the 13Fs is going up. We see some of the same names, some hedge fund-like exposure, but we also see significant adoption from financial advisors and others in those filings. So again, I was left in a very bullish state of mind.
So there's been a lot of movement on Wall Street since Trump won office, a slew of pro-crypto appointments to leadership across the government, an executive order that paves the way for favorable policy. And then at the SEC, a lot of big changes in the last month, perhaps most notably, at least for Wall Street, the rollback of a rule that stood in the way of banks being able to custody cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin on their balance sheet. I feel like up to this point, the big Wall Street banks with crypto ETFs on their books just reflected the interest of their wealth management clients. Is this quarter, Q1 2025, the real game changer where we start to see Wall Street take a more active stake in the digital asset sector?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. You have to think about what that bulletin, SAB 121, said. It said that crypto was kryptonite, that literally if you touched it, you were going to die as a bank. And now that's been removed. They can integrate with it. They can use it for custody. They can use it for prime brokerage. It's absolutely the case that many major Wall Street firms want in on the crypto boom. They see the money being made here from a custodial and trading perspective. And I think they're going to start moving in Q1, and that's going to accelerate, through the rest of the year.
Now, all in, the Bitcoin spot funds have $115 billion in assets under management. The ETF launch certainly broke records, but it started to stall out even in the Trump era. Now, part of that is because outside of Morgan Stanley, the wirehouses haven't greenlit their FAs to start actively pitching these funds. So what else is standing in the way of adoption? Are we going to see the floodgates really open at some point this year? I'm just trying to understand what the next big trigger will be.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been on the road recently meeting with those national account platforms. I'll say that those meetings look very different this quarter than they did in past quarters. You used to travel out to the middle of the country and you'd meet with 2 or 3 people, relatively junior. Now those meetings are staffed by 10 or 15 very senior people. So I think they are getting very close to opening the gates. We're also seeing many of the people who bought Bitcoin ETFs in 2024 doubling down on this space. When I look at the flows, I'm actually extremely optimistic. I think we're on track to top 2024's flows. I think once those national account platforms do approve these ETF for solicited sale, I think it's going to accelerate it. I wouldn't be surprised if we ended the year above $50 billion in flows. I think it's really just a matter of time.
Now, new ETFs that combine Bitcoin exposure and options are coming this year. Is that the next big product that Wall Street has to look forward to when it comes to digital asset investing? Or are there other financial instruments coming down the pike that will help to build out a more robust market infrastructure around these spot products?
Yeah, you know how the ETF innovation machine goes. It knows no ends. So we're going to see everything, right? People are trying to enhance the existing Bitcoin and Ethereum ETFs through staking and in-kind creations. Those will make those more attractive products. They're trying to launch new individual crypto assets. They're trying to uplist index-based exposure. You mentioned option strategies that generate income. We're seeing buffered yield. I think the way to think of this is crypto is really emerging as an institutional asset class. And it's going to have all the bells and whistles of any other institutional asset class. Long only, long short, covered call, buffered exposure. And people are going to be able to integrate Bitcoin into their portfolios the same way they do stocks, bonds, real estate, and commodities. So we're in this new era of crypto ETPs, and we're going to get dozens of filings and dozens of launches throughout this year with every possible flavor of sort of financial exposure you can think of.
Okay, one more thing before we go. We saw earlier this week that the SEC formally acknowledged Bitwise's application for spot XRP ETF. Now, I know you can't talk about the specific application, but I'm wondering if you can talk about what you've heard in terms of demand for an XRP ETF in particular. Obviously, there was less demand for an ETH ETF than a Bitcoin one, but there is increasing adoption. So what's the scope look like for an XRP fund?
Yeah, I would say 2 things on that front, without talking about the Bitwise filing specifically, as you mentioned. One, I think there's substantial demand for an XRP ETF. XRP has had a sustained community for an extremely long period of time. It's an asset that trades significantly on centralized exchanges. I think people would love to find a way to hold it in a simple, low cost, easy to use ETP structure. And I will say the second piece is the SEC is much more receptive to discussions under the new administration than they were in the past. In the previous administration, the door would simply be shut. There was no way to discuss things like staking or in-kind or maybe new assets. I think, and I can tell you that has completely changed. They're much more open to dialogue. So I'm optimistic we're going to see, XRP ETFs, Solana ETFs. I think the killer app in this space will actually be an index-based ETF. I think a lot of people want to just make a generalized bet on crypto, and I'm hopeful we get that at the end of this year as well. So count me as optimistic.
Okay, that's all for Crypto World today, but we'll be back again tomorrow, and we'll see you then.